Hello students and welcome back. This is chapter 4 from the novel David Copperfield. The chapter's name is I Fall into Disfavor and Shame. What is the meaning of disfavor? Disfavor means unlikeness, when no one likes you, when no one needs you. This is called disfavor. Shame, when you feel ashamed of yourself or you feel shame about something, that means that you feel that you are the reason for this wrong thing, or the reason that this happened. So David in this chapter feels that that no one likes him and that he is doing something wrong. Let's start. After David returned back from Begatty's trip and saw the changes in the house, David felt misery and sadness, as he thought of why did he leave Emily and came back to a place where no one cared or wanted him. So David felt, after he returned back to his own house, after the changes that happened in the house, David felt that there is something wrong. He felt that there is no place for him in this house anymore. No one is caring for him and no one wanted to stay with him. So he was feeling sad that he left Emily and Begatty's family in Yarmouth. Clara, David's mother, went to cheer David up in his room, but found out that he was crying and thinking about her marriage to Mr. Murdstone. David was thinking, why did she marry this Mr. Murdstone? When David pushed his mother away because he was angry of her, as he didn't want to talk to her, she looked at Begatty angrily and accused her. Accused means she told Begatty or accused someone of doing something wrong. She accused Begatty that she turned David against her. She thought that Begatty is turned David against her own mother, his own mother. Mr. Murdstone appears and held David's arm and asked Clara to be more firm with David. What's the meaning of being more firm? To be controlling and to not show him love and affection. So what did Clara do? Clara apologizes to Mr. Murdstone, saying that she forgot and she was really upset. It was obvious that Mr. Murdstone could make Clara do whatever he says. Mr. Murdstone orders Clara to go downstairs, and then he locked the room and looked at Begatty, shouting at her. He said to her she shouldn't call Clara by her old name as Mrs. Copperfield, and that she should start calling her Mrs. Murdstone, because she married him, of course. So that her name changed from Mrs. Copperfield and she became Mrs. Murdstone. Mr. Murdstone closed the door and spoke to David alone. He threatened David in a way as if he was a dog or a horse, and told him that if he didn't do as he orders, he would hit him. Mr. Murdstone closed the door and told David that if he had a house or if he had a horse or a dog who wouldn't do what he orders, he would hit them. So he would do to David the same thing if David didn't do what he orders. Mr. Murdstone wanted David to realize that he was a weak kid who can't respond or do nothing to anything Mr. Murdstone would say or do. So when he asked David what was on his face, and though he knew that it was tear marks, but David didn't confess to that. David didn't want to say that it is right, I was crying. And he told Mr. Murdstone that it was only dirt. David didn't want to give Mr. Murdstone the satisfaction that he can hurt David. He didn't want to show Mr. Murdstone that he was weak. He didn't want him to feel happy that he hurt him. David didn't want to have a bad relationship with Mr. Murdstone. But in fact, a kind word from Mr. Murdstone would have improved his whole life. If Mr. Murdstone gave David a word of explanation or encouragement or even pity, that would make David respect him rather than hating him. Mr. Murdstone didn't even show David that he was welcomed in his own home. Mr. Murdstone treated David so badly that David waited for a kind word of Mr. Murdstone. that would change everything. But Mr. Murdstone didn't even encourage or even feel pity for David. He disrespected David, and he didn't care for him. That's why David didn't respect and hated Mr. Murdstone. Clara didn't show David love or affection, but in secret. When she wanted to show David love, she would do it in secret, behind Mr. Murdstone's back, as if they were doing something wrong. She asked David to respect his supposedly new father and obey him. She wanted David to respect Mr. Murdstone. But one day, a cart came to the house in which a new tyrant came to the house. What's the meaning of tyrant? A tyrant is a person who loves controlling everything around him. But even when he controls everything around him, he do it in a bad way. He do it using force. So one day a cart came into the house, and the new tyrant came to the house. Who was that? She was Miss Murdstone. Who is Miss Murdstone? Mr. Murdstone's sister. She was a gloomy looking lady and had the same dark hair as her brother. She looked at David, and then she said, "I don't like young boys," declaring her hatred for David from the first moment they met. Miss Murdstone didn't come to visit, but she came to stay forever. How? She came not to stay as a guest. She came supposedly to help Clara to manage the house. She came saying or acting, "I will help you." But she came to control the house. In fact, she came to take control over the house, and she even took the keys off Clara's hands. Clara's keys represent Clara's control of the house. But when Miss Murdstone came, she took the keys off Clara's hands, saying that she was too pretty and thoughtless to have any trouble. Saying that Clara, in short, was a child. She can't have any trouble or think about any trouble. Miss Murdstone became the jailer, and David and Clara became her prisoners. So we can see here that Mr. and Miss Murdstone came to control the house. They didn't came to help Clara, as they say, but they came to control the house and take control of Clara's and David's life. Clara didn't surrender that easily, though. She didn't want to surrender and give control to Miss Murdstone easily like that. She fought back, but Mr. Murdstone spoke to Clara, saying that he was disappointed in her. What's the meaning of disappointed? He didn't. This means that he is sad because of what she is doing, or he is angry of what she was doing. He told Clara that Miss Murdstone only came to help, and she shouldn't be so defensive about controlling the house. He wanted Clara not to defend her rights. He told her, "Don't be so defensive. She only came to help." He made Clara believe that she was wrong to even have an opinion in her own house. So finally Clara had to apologize to Mrs. Murdstone to Miss Murdstone, sorry, after Miss Murdstone threatened to leave Clara to leave the house. After Miss Murdstone threatened to leave the house. Though Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone always talk about firmness, but its importance, but they wouldn't like it for themselves. They always tell Clara, "You have to be firm, you have to be firm, you have to be firm." Being firm means that you take control of things, to defend your right. But when she defended or acting firm in front of him and Miss Murdstone, they didn't like that. They wanted to use this firmness against others, but not themselves. For them, it was another name for tyranny. They used the word firmness as they used the word tyranny. They used the word this to control others around them. Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone told Clara that David should be sent to a boarding school. What's a boarding school? A boarding school is a school where the children were sent to, and they would stay there the whole semester. They will stay there the whole term, and they wouldn't come back to their parents until the vacation, the mid-year vacation or the summer vacation. They would stay the whole school there, the whole term or the time of the school there. And of course Clara agreed to what they said. But Luckily, nothing happened for a while. Clara used to give David his lessons at home. She used to study for David and give him lessons. And David was willing, ready, and quick to learn, and he was quick to learn from his mother. But then Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone began to interfere with his learning. They began to change the way he learned things. And they kept telling Clara that she had to be more firm, and that is when David's learning became miserable rather than fun. David's learning changed as soon as Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone began interfering with his learning. One day, while David was studying with Clara, and he began listing what he studied, and he tripped over a word. Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone looked angrily at him, which made him nervous, and he began to trip more and more. What's the meaning of trip here? Trip means making a mistake. When you are listing a lesson, that means you memorize it first, then you tell your teacher or you tell your parents what you memorized. This is called listing your lessons. So while David was studying and he was listing his lessons to his mother, he tripped over a word. He made a mistake. Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone looked angrily at him. This made him nervous. So he began making more mistakes, tripping more and more. Mr. Murdstone stood up from his chair, taking the book at hand. He took the book at his hand and hit David on his head. David. The next day, David saw that Mr. Murdstone had a cane in hand. The next day, David went to study with his mother, but he saw Mr. Murdstone sitting there with a cane or a stick in his hand, saying to Clara that he often was hit when he was a little boy, and that hitting David would do him good, and that it was a way of showing firmness and to help him study better in his studies. Clara agreed to everything they said. Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone told Clara that it's okay to hit David, it's okay to do awful stuff to him, and this will make him great at studying. And Clara agreed with what they were saying. David started to list his lessons, started saying his lessons, but then again he tripped and he made mistakes, as he was afraid and nervous seeing Mr. Murdstone holding the cane. Mr. Murdstone took David to his room, and David started begging him not to hit him. But Mr. Murdstone didn't care for what David was saying and twisted his arms, and started hitting him. Then David bit Mr. Murdstone's hand. That made Mr. Murdstone angrier. What did Mr. Murdstone do? He started hitting David as if he was about to kill him. David could hear Peggotty and his mother Clara crying outside the room. Mr. Murdstone locked David in the room and left him alone. Miss Murdstone came to David in the morning, telling him that he was only allowed to walk in the garden for a half an hour a day. So every day he have half an hour to walk in the garden, not more than that. Then that night, Peggotty came to talk to David, and she told him the news that he was going to be sent to a boarding school near London. Peggotty came to check on David, and she told him that that Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone were going to send him to a boarding school away from his mother. But David didn't care about that. All he cared about to make sure that his mother wasn't angry with him. And this shows us how much David loved his mother Clara. After 5 days of imprisonment, David went downstairs. He stayed in his room for 5 days with only half an hour outside. He went downstairs to see his mother, but the unthinkable happened. He didn't see what was going to happen. He didn't think about it. When David hugged his mother, Clara blamed David. Blame means she told him that it was your fault, saying that he hurt the man she loves. David hurt Mr. Murdstone. She told him, you hurt Mr. Murdstone. David didn't believe what he was hearing. He knew that Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone persuaded her that David was wicked. So David understood that they both, Mr. Murdstone and Miss Murdstone, persuaded his mother or told his mother that he was a wicked person. David was ready to go to school, and the cart came and he was sent without anyone saying goodbye. Bigotty wasn't allowed to see him at the gates. Bigotty didn't came out to see him off at the gates, and his mother only looked at him without hugging him. And she kept telling him, I forgive you, my boy, I forgive you, my boy, as if it was all his fault, as if David was wrong from the beginning. Thank you, guys. This is chapter 4, and we're gonna discuss the questions with each other, of course, the next time, and then meet you in chapter 5. Thank you. Hello, students.